everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Links and Leaders Inside Supply Chain Careers, a podcast series from WIN-NextGen. I'm so honored to welcome Jennifer Schauble. You ready to dive in?
I am. Thank you so much for having me tonight, Elisa. I've been so excited all day leading up to this. My family's excited. They all want to see this when it's done. So thank you for having me. I think this is a great opportunity to really kind of spark some interest in helping people understand really what makes up supply chain, because we hear those terms all too often, but I think they're frequently misunderstood or overgeneralized.
I agree completely. And I think this is a very timely topic. So, what I'd like to just start off to help our audience understand is really just getting a little bit more of understanding around your career journey. So, we
Sure.
understand every career has a starting point, and often the path is not always obvious, right, at the beginning. I know I can attest to that, and we've
Yeah.
known each other for a while. So, could you just share a little bit about your career journey, Jen, and how you first discovered supply chain as a profession?
Absolutely. So this is a funny story that I always enjoy telling. The day that it happened, and it was literally one day that flipped a switch to my world of supply chain, I was not very amused. So I chemical engineer by education. If you would have told me when I was graduating a really long time ago that this is where my career would end up, I probably never would have believed you. So spent some time in environmental regulation, safety, health, environmental operations, all working for manufacturers. Um, then I had a brief stint in production operations as well, until one day I walked into my plant. I worked for Lonza for 15 years. As I walked in very early, the security guard said to me, the plant manager wants to see you. And I'll never forget February 27th, 2004. It was my best friend's birthday. That's how I remember. Um, so it's like 6:30 in the morning. I walk in the door and I said, "Hey, Tim, you wanted to see me." He says to me, "Yeah, overnight I got rid of the purchasing manager and the production planner and scheduler. So you're going to do both now." And I remember standing there just completely stunned. I didn't see it coming. And I said to him, I don't know how to do those things. He pats me on the back and says, "You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out." I had no idea how to log into SAP. We were an SAP driven company. And for those of you who don't know, it's an ERP software platform that you either love it or you hate it. And I had no training in it whatsoever. I could only surmise how to piece together a supply chain. Unfortunately, I was missing a lot of files, but I like a good puzzle. So after I got past the absolute sheer panic, I really found my groove, and that's where I really started to excel. So I started supply chain more in a um, purchasing role, materials management, production planning and scheduling, all of which goes into the larger supply chain. So, fortunately for me, I knew how the back half of the supply chain worked because I knew how production worked and I knew how to get product out the door. But what I didn't always understand was how to get everything in the door that you needed, how to negotiate contracts. Did we have contracts? So it opened up an entire universe for me. How to expedite a shipment, how to get something through customs, how to get something delivered by Blue Streak when you're in a panic and you're waiting for them to unload the container at the shipping dock and it's not coming and you need it for production in 6 hours. And my old boss said to me, just whatever you do, don't shut production down. And I never did. I mean, it was close. We were within hours of shutting it all down. And oh my goodness, it was so stressful, but I learned so much. And I really got to touch all the various aspects of supply chain. But I found where I really enjoy is supplier relationships. That's where I really excel. I like the minutia and the detail of planning a supply chain. When do I need more product? When do I package? When do I bring in the raw materials? All of that, it's like one big puzzle, and it's just so fascinating to me.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Jen. This is a really great place to start. And I think our listeners really, at least I certainly did get a clear, understanding of how you can, go into work one day and come doing one thing and come out, having a whole new world of opportunities opened up to you. So,
It
uh,
was.
Yes. And so I think, many people hear the word supply chain, but do not fully understand what it means in real life. You've given us
Mhm.
some clarity around that just with your overview here, but how could you explain the supply chain to a middle school, a high school, or a
Sure.
college student who may never have heard about it as a career option? And if you use any acronyms, always ask folks, if you can explain them, we did use one earlier, ERP,
Yes.
Enterprise Resource Planning. If we
Yes,
use any
ma'am.
more, we just want to make sure that our users can understand what those are.
Absolutely. So yeah, so if I were going to explain what a supply chain is to a middle schooler, I always try to break down an example that's relevant. So I think of a supply chain in the terms of a grocery store. You need to fix your family's supply chain because you need to go get food. So you have your list, you have your raw materials that you need. You go to the store, you pick things off of a shelf, and then you go through the checkout line. And as they scan all of your items, it's taking them out of their inventory and putting it into your house's inventory. But then when you really want to walk it back yet another step, how do all those raw materials, all the groceries, how do those get to the grocery store? Well, you need somebody who knows what you need to order. You need somebody to do the ordering. You need someone to go pick up the order from wherever it comes from. And it won't just be from one location, it will be from multiple locations, sometimes around the world, but definitely around the country. Even if it is all US based, it would come from around the country. Who's going to drive the truck to get the groceries to the grocery store? Who's going to check the groceries into the grocery store so that I can come and I can check them out to have food for my house? So I always think of a supply chain in terms of going to the grocery store, probably because I love to eat, and I love to cook and I love to bake, as you know. So I always think of it in those terms. So if you think of the supply chain from start to finish, somebody needs to think about what sort of food should go on the grocery store shelves. Well, somebody's got to execute that thought. Somebody has to negotiate all of those contracts that says, I'm going to order 100 dozen eggs every week from an egg distributor, from a chicken farmer. I'm going to need milk. How much milk do I need? So then you need to measure your what's called throughput. You need to know how much you are going to eat or drink, as the case may be in the terms of milk. And when you calculate your throughput, then that says, okay, I need to have this much stock in the grocery store, this much on order, and then heaven forbid a blizzard is coming. Then what do? Then you expedite all of your shipments. And if I talk about expediting the shipments, it means I call my closest contact. And this is where those supplier relationships are absolutely critical to the success of any supply chain. Hey, Joe, I know I said I needed 100 dozen eggs on Thursday. It's Monday and I need them by noontime. How can we make this work? And then you work together back and forth and you get those. You may not get all 100 dozen on Monday afternoon, but you might get 20, and then 20 the next day and 20 the day after that, and it all ends up to the point where you've fulfilled all of your orders. But it does not just take one person. I think that's the sometimes a common misconception as well. Like when I say I run a supply chain for a living, people think I do it all. And some littler tiny humans think that I actually drive the trucks, which I do not. No one wants that. But you need people. You need your people who can do your ordering. You need your people who can negotiate the contracts. You need your people who can drive the trucks. This is something that really is becoming critical in the world of supply chain. You hear about it in the news all of the time, how all of our truck drivers are retiring. So how do we move the food? How do we move the goods? So people need to look at careers in transportation. The transportation industry is one that I touch a little. I try to touch it as little as possible, mostly because I'm always afraid I'm going to go to customs jail if I put something wrong on a piece of paper bringing it into the US. And that's not really a thing, but it's just my own little angst. But how to move material, I think, is something that we should really focus on in WIN-NextGen, not only with supply chain, but an aspect of supply chain, which is transportation, because it's a huge industry and frequently the undersung hero of supply chains.
Oh, Jen, you're speaking my language. I believe our truckers and transporters keep America moving. So, in great respect. So, I love that usage of the grocery store
Mhm.
analogy for helping people understand. I think that is just so real and practical
Mhm.
in how you describe it. And what it also makes me think of is just when you think about groceries and the essential, components they provide for our families, for our communities, is what makes supply chain such an exciting and impactful field to really work in today. Uh, what do you think is there that is can make it really exciting for our young people to understand just some of these opportunities?
Absolutely. So I think it depends on where your interests lie. Some people like the hustle and bustle of the transportation end of things, expediting shipments in, getting them cleared through customs, all of that. I find that very stressful. And I'm frankly out of practice. I've not done that in probably almost 20 years. So that I don't miss so much. But things that I like, because I like taking something that's really complicated and breaking it down and say, especially if there's an issue with a supplier relationship, what is the crux of the issue? Like we both have a good common interest here. Let's figure out how to work together. So I
Right.
like that aspect of it. I also like because I'm a little bit of a nerd, as my children call me part of the nerd herd, and I'm okay with that. Nerds are people too. I like
I'm
the
with you.
exactly. I enjoy kind of the math of it all. In, out, when, why, how much. I like that because to me it's one big fun puzzle to put together. And in the case of where I work for a very small pharmaceutical company in the rare disease space. I know that when I get it right, and I will get it right, my supply chain will serve thousands of patients who don't have any other therapies to help them. So that is a lot of what drives me. One of my old CEOs would always say to me, patients are waiting. And I always remember that. And no matter who your customer is in your supply chain, someone is waiting for you to expedite that shipment, to make that order, to pick that order up and deliver it, to consume it in production, to create a different product, to get it back out the door to the next customer. Someone is waiting, and it's monumentally important.
That's so, so true. And that's, you started off just, sharing that so often the people of supply chain aren't often recognized because it's really what's keeping things running for the most part. And for young people who are considering this field, what skills matter most, do you think, when starting out in supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and you need a few key skills. One, you do need to be somewhat analytical. You do not need to be an engineer. So, one of the best supply chain person I've ever hired, he was a supply chain major, phenomenal. And I'm trying to get him on maybe a next podcast. So you don't need to be an engineer, but you do have to enjoy driving down into the details. And when I tell you I get down to like a tenth of a kilogram, which is a very, very small quantity, because that carries a value and it's expensive material. So I don't want to order too much, but not too little, and and so on and so on. So driving down into the analytical, being comfortable. Also having the skill of knowing how to talk to people, because I go back and forth a couple rounds of email, but when the third email comes back around and we've still resolved nothing, pick up the phone. Can we talk for
Mm.
15 minutes? And you can resolve more in a 15-minute conversation than probably 30 rounds of emails, um, for sure. So being able to talk to people, understanding what is important to them. That was something that was an acquired skill for me, that I would always say, but I need this. I was rather young in my career and no one taught me how to be in supply chain, but this is what I need. And the person would say, but I can't do that. It's the materials in China. I can't just pluck it out and get it to you overnight. And so understanding their needs, their limitations, matching them up with your needs and wants and your limitations and making it all work. So learning how to have those relationships. And also being quizzical, I guess, for lack of a better word, asking why. Why does it need to be today? Why can't it be Thursday? Tell me why today is so important. Tell me why you need 100 pieces instead of 50 pieces. You know, why do you hold your safety stock? Safety stock is when you have enough material to meet your needs, plus you need a little surplus because you need to account for any changes in your demand. So why do I hold 20% safety stock and not 30? Well, because 30 comes at a greater cost than 20, and we don't want to absorb that financial burden. Asking why. I feel sometimes I always say whenever somebody answers a question for me at work, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have like 10 more questions because each question builds, but just having that quizzical nature about you, being organized, being detail oriented, all very critical to being an effective supply chain person,
Mhm.
no matter what aspect of supply chain you work in.
You hit on just some excellent attributes, all of which I completely concur with you as a comrade in this space. And, one of the things I hope we'll have some time to get to, because a moment ago I mentioned, that oftentimes supply chain has always been kind of relegated to back office, but really today's world has brought supply chain to the forefront of so many business operations, given the numerous forces that we have that impact our global, local, state supply chains. And
Absolutely.
these attributes that you're talking about for a supply chain professional really come to play when you think about some of the challenges that a supply chain professional really has to bring to the table to
Yeah.
his or her organization. So, quick, just kind of look back into your yesteryears on your own career. What would you say is a lesson, Jen, that you learned early that shaped the leader of who you are today?
Yeah. So most lessons are learned the hard way, right? Otherwise, they're not such good lessons sometimes. So I got a call. So when I worked in manufacturing, our facility was 24/7. So my entire family was used to calls all night long. And about 10 o'clock at night, somebody called me and like, Jen, we don't have this raw material for production. I said, yes, you do. I looked in SAP, our enterprise resource planning system before I left. You have X amount of kilograms. And this was a really superstar operator. He said, Jen, I'm telling you, it's not there. So I got up. I had the luxury of living 5 minutes from work. He and I are in the plant in the middle of the night, and we're crawling through racks looking. And that's when I learned to trust nothing that is in a system that you did not create yourself. Trust and verify, right? So that was a really hard lesson learned. Fortunately, though, I had a really good relationship with the supplier. I called him at 6 a.m. the next morning. I said, I need it by 10. What can you do for me? He had it there at 9. Thank goodness he had it in stock. It was a fairly common material, so it wasn't any one of our quirky ones that we used. But so that's when I figured out that I had inherited a pretty hefty mess of an inventory system that was not accurate. And that created a lot of angst, a lot of stress, write off of millions of dollars of materials. But we got it right before I left the company. I made sure that the inventory was finally reconciled. But so how I combated that, here's where the lesson came in. I still needed to make sure that production ran. So I would go in 4 or 5 in the morning. I would take an operator with me, and we would literally go through and we would mark drums. Take this one, take that one, don't take that one. Oh, this one doesn't really exist. Cross it off the list. So we were manually running a very large scale production facility because we had to. I mean, that was the only way to get it done. So that I would say my greatest lesson learned is don't necessarily trust what is in a computer system. Sometimes you bring in we in supply chain we say garbage in equals garbage out. So if you don't have a correct inventory when you start, you're certainly not going to have one midway through. So it's probably the most valuable lesson, but also a lesson in being determined to make it work, having the what my mom would have called stick-to-itiveness to make sure that the job got done, and that I fulfilled the requirements of my job and then some. And I had a lot of really good operator friends who were always happy to come and help me out and climb through racks with me at some ungodly early hour to make sure that we could run for the day. So that was a really valuable lesson in teamwork as well.
For all of our listeners out here, I don't know, just every question and response here, I'm just beaming because I just feel like this journey is so real. And we're calling
Mhm.
this podcast series Links and Leaders because supply chains really are built on connections. Jen, you getting, that person to join you, oh dark 30 in the morning to help make sure mission occurred. That was because of a connection, right? And careers
Absolutely.
are connections too. So how have professional relationships and networks played a role in your own career journey, Jen?
Great question. So, one thing that I try to hammer into every young person's head is the importance of network and professional relationships. And in this era that we're in, where people don't necessarily like to talk to each other as much, please do. I encourage you to go out, find somebody who's maybe a little bit more seasoned than you or does something different than you. Pick their brain and just say, hey, can I have a cup of coffee with you for 30 minutes? I just want to understand more of what you do. Um, just having that network. And I am working with someone now in India that I worked with 2 jobs ago, but I could not find a source of this really unique material. And so I was talking with my boss, whom I've also worked with in multiple capacities in multiple companies. And he said, try Abe. And I'm like, is Abe still working? And he said, I don't know. See if Abe's still working. So, hi, Abe. It's Jen. It's been a long time. Hope you're doing well. Hey, do you have a source for blah, blah, blah material? Emails me back in an hour. Jen, so great to hear from you. I was hoping you were still working. Let me get right on that for you. So knowing that person, that connection that I worked with probably 7 years ago at this point, knew exactly who I was. It also helps to have an unusual last name, but I knew who to go to. He knew who I was, and we were off to the races. And I encourage young people to use LinkedIn. If you've ever worked with me, even if you've ever met me, send me an invite on LinkedIn. Hey, Jen, I heard your podcast. I'd really like to connect and learn more. Can we work with Elisa through WIN-NextGen, to maybe find a time to talk one-on-one about supply chain? The answer will be yes. But connecting with people, even if you've just worked with them, if you're a younger person and you work at like a summer internship, sometimes young people feel a little bit awkward about connecting with somebody. Well, I only made coffee there. That's great. We all started making coffee somewhere. Use that, use those names, learn what people do, and learn what they're about as a human too, because if you can connect with somebody on a human level, you have a much better chance at having a sustained relationship with that person throughout your professional career.
Right on, Jen. And I look back at what you're just saying with Abe, and heck, you and I worked at in supply chain at a French chemical
We sure
company
did.
umpteen years ago, and look, here we are still connected.
Yep.
So it really is a testament of the power of connection. So we also know there's a power around mentorship, right? And was there a mentor or a leader who helped guide you in your early career?
Sure. So the majority of my career, I've spent in manufacturing, as you know. And when I was 20, I had just turned 29. I had two little girls at home, and I was promoted to environmental supervisor. I had 8 men who worked for me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were all older than I was. They all made more money than I did. So you can imagine how well that started out. It ended up fine. It started out a little rocky and very stressful. But my boss at the time, he was Paul Saraki. Shout out to Paul. I am largely where I am because of his support through all the years. So when I had 2 little girls who were sick and couldn't go to daycare, Paul, I'm sorry, I gotta work from home today. Or I gotta come in tonight. Yep, Jen, not a problem. We know you're good for it. One of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me when I started managing people, above all, be fair. Listen to people, hear what they say again, and be fair. And that has paid off in absolute dividends. Just learning to, I tend to be a little impatient. And for those of you like you who really know me, that's not shocking. But I have learned, especially when dealing with humans, to take a minute, take a breath, and listen. And I've gotten much better about that as I've gotten older. 55-year-old me is much more patient than 29-year-old me who had zero patience in the world. But taking a breath, listening to what people are trying to tell you, because a lot of times it's what they're not saying that you have to really kind of dig down. And Paul was an engineer as well, so engineers aren't always real good in the feelings category, but I'm a pretty good read of people. But his mentorship, his support when I was, a young mom trying to work full time, he let me work an alternate work week. It was a creative solution to a very real problem, which was two little girls who needed a little bit more time at home with mom. I would work Monday to Thursday, and then I would work a half a day at night or on a weekend. Since I was a supervisor and had people who worked 24/7, I could do that. He was a big proponent. My plant manager, Ken Morgan, was a big proponent, and it was absolutely revolutionary. No one had ever even thought of suggesting it before, but it was really important to me. So therefore, it became important to Paul and Ken, and they were hugely supportive. And that really helped kind of launch my career in a managerial direction, and then eventually supply chain, as you know. And then when Jackie went to kindergarten, then I went back full time because they were just kind of like, okay, we gave you a few years of this alternate schedule and it's kind of starting to not work so well. So you'll go back full time. And that worked great.
Oh, Jen, this is fantastic because a question that I did want to be able to have time to touch upon was that balancing work, life, family, and in a career that a lot of women and young girls may think there's not a place for me to be able to do both. And so you hit on that with that illustration on that question and that topic so beautifully. And I love what you were saying in terms of take a breath and listen. Super powerful. And we always want to make sure that we can leave our listeners with some really great nuggets and words of wisdom. And I know many of our listeners are students exploring their future careers. So, Jen, if a middle school or a high school or college student is high school students, college students, they're listening today and thinking about their future, what would you encourage them to do right now to start exploring the opportunities in supply chain?
I would ask them to do just that. Explore, ask questions, explore some more, ask some more questions, reach out to people and just say, and I mean, I'll talk to anybody. I would probably talk to my teacup for a couple of hours if I got bored enough. But like I'll ask people, I'm a big fan of Trader Joe's. I was there today and I asked a question about a product, and the manager and I had a lovely chat about why a product is seasonal and how I need to buy more next time and sustain my own supply chain inside because I didn't realize the product ends every September. But being curious, being quizzical, and not being afraid to reach out. Any young person that ever asks me a question really about anything, I would never dismiss anyone. And shame on those adults who do, because I think we are doing our youth a great injustice when we don't give them airtime, especially when a youth wants to engage. I am all for mentorship. I'm all for speaking to somebody just off the cuff for 10 minutes, but I would be tickled if somebody came up to me and said, Jen, what do you think I should think about in supply chain? Think about it all. Because again, going back to where we started at the beginning, if you would have told me 33 years ago this was where my career would be, I probably would have laughed, be like, I'm not going to do that. But here we are. And in 2004, I really started finding my groove in supply chain. So ask the questions, ask more questions. And when you're done with those questions, ask a few more and make the connections, get out, talk to people, connect with people on LinkedIn, talk to your teachers, especially for the younger set, the middle school, the high school, find a teacher that resonates with you. doesn't have to have anything to do with supply chain. It's finding that youth adult connection where you find someone that understands you. For me, it was my high school chemistry teacher, Mr. Harris. He just unleashed a passion for me with chemistry, one that I never even would have thought of. When I first opened my chemistry book the first day my sophomore year in high school, like, oh, this looks scary. I don't think I'm going to understand this. Well, and here I am, a chemical engineer. So believe the unbelievable, know that you can do it, know that you just have to try, and never be afraid to fail. I said that I've never shut down production, but it came really close. And if I failed, would the world have ended? No, it would have had some really uncomfortable conversations, but failure is okay. And we have to get our young people to embrace that concept that it's better to try and fail than to not try at all and stay in your comfort zone. Embrace the discomfort.
Oh, exactly. And you hit on some really powerful words of wisdom for our young people. And we also know that part of this journey is for our parents and educators. We host these conversations so they can grow and be exposed and have access to information that perhaps they were unaware of. So when we think about our parents and educators helping guide young people toward career paths, in addition to what you've shared already, are there any other points that you'd want them to know about supply chain as a career opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. So, especially for parents. So, if you're not familiar with careers in supply chain or how to get there, find somebody who is there. That's one thing that I learned as a parent. It truly takes a village. And my girls are much older now, and I'm a grandparent of three little boys. And it takes an entire village, not only to raise the kids and the grandkids, us adults, we all need each other. And you have expertise, Elisa, that I don't, and vice versa. And when one of my daughters was thinking about becoming a physician assistant, she ended up as an engineer also. But when she thought about becoming a physician assistant, I didn't really know much about it, but a friend of mine did because her son was looking at programs. So I called and picked her brain. So get to know the other parents. For the educators out there, don't hesitate to reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on your local community page. I was a guest speaker for an international business class for several years in a row at our high school because I happened to see a LinkedIn post that said, hey, has anybody done business overseas that would be willing to come and talk to kids about careers and how you get there? I'm like, yes, please. Sounds like a lot of fun. So educators, reach out to your local community because what you will find is there is vast knowledge out there and a willingness to help and a willingness to get this next generation to where they need to go.
Oh, spot on. And all, if you didn't know, Jen is also a career navigator for WIN-NextGen, and we have others in the space of supply chain. So please feel free, become a member. You can connect with Jen for questions, whether you're a parent, an educator, a student, myself as well. So Jen, if you could give one piece of advice to the next gens listening today about building a successful and meaningful career, anything you didn't cover today, this is your chance to share it.
Oh boy, I have a lot of years to wrap into one sentence, but I will try my best. Expect the unexpected and be resilient. Resilience is key, no matter what you do. Doesn't have to be STEM, doesn't have to be supply chain, doesn't have to be skilled trade. You get knocked down, you get back up. I've been knocked down more times in my career than I would care to count, but I kept getting back up, sometimes perhaps foolishly, but I had to keep going, had to keep trying. Have that drive, but find the spark. Find what makes you tick, find what brings you joy, find what just really makes you want to move mountains for a job well done.
Find the spark. I am taking that to the bank. I love that,
Yep.
Jen. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
insights, your experiences with us today. Conversations like this, Jen, really help bring supply chain careers to life and show how strong teams, how mentorship, meaningful connections can really shape successful careers. Until next time, I'm Elisa Basnight. Thank you for being a part of the WIN-NextGen community. And as I like to always say, together we can.